I am Luciana Hartwin. Welcome to the Lilith Verse. As always, if you find value here, please share, like, comment, and subscribe. There was no garden, not yet. No rib, no serpent, no shame, only water. Long before Eden, before the breath of a single Hebrew word stirred dust into flesh, there was another beginning, a beginning older than Genesis, older than law, older even than the gods who would one day claim to have made everything. The world, you see, has many origin stories, but the first ones were written not in ink on parchment, but pressed into soft clay with a reed stylus. Before they wrote of sin, they wrote of the sea. The Sumerians, those quiet architects of the world's first cities, didn't begin their story with a god and a garden. They began it with a goddess. She was not light. She was not the word. She was not love. She was water. Her name was Nammu, and she was the primordial sea. She existed before anything else, before time had teeth, before names mattered, before the sun knew how to rise or set. There was no sky above her, no land beneath her, just depth, just potential, just silence and tide. From her womb came On the sky, and Kai the earth. If you're picturing something grand and explosive, don't. Creation here was not a command or a miracle. It was an emergence, a rising bubble in the deep, a slow unfolding of the possible. On and Kai, sky and earth, were bound together at birth, wrapped tight like lovers, or roots, or dreams that refused to wake. And for a time they stayed that way, close, indistinguishable, locked in a kind of divine embrace. Lightless, yes, formless, yes, but alive. Eventually they bore a son, Enlil, god of wind and air, and like all children born to tightly wound parents, Enlil wanted space. So he did what children of cramped origins do. He pushed, he pried, he tore the sky from the earth. With the strength of a storm, Enlil forced his father On upwards into the heavens, and his mother Kai down into solid earth. And in the space between, he made the world. The Sumerians didn't imagine a perfect paradise born from divine benevolence. They imagined conflict, separation, and sacrifice, not as a tragedy, but as the very blueprint of being. Creation, for them, wasn't the beginning of peace. It was the beginning of tension. Heaven pulled away from earth. The wind howled through the gap, and into that hollow space light poured, and rivers ran, and stories began. We tell ourselves stories about beginnings because they explain what kind of world we believe we live in. If your beginning starts in a perfect garden with a single forbidden mistake, you may come to believe that life is a fall from grace. But if your beginning comes from the sea, from a goddess older than the stars, from the wind tearing sky from soil, so that something, anything, can finally breathe, then your story is not about falling. It is about emerging, becoming, changing, rising from the depths. The primordial sea, Nammu. Before the gods had names, before the sky knew where to hang itself, before the first breath stirred dust into form, there was Nammu. She was not created. She was not born. She was there, the beginning that needed no beginning. She was the primordial sea, deep and endless, a womb without walls. No throne, no word, no hand, just water, infinite and alive. Not silent, but singing softly in a language older than stars. If Genesis begins with a void, hovering, shapeless, with the Spirit of God moving upon the face of the waters, then Sumer begins within the waters themselves, and that Spirit, she is the water. Nammu was not a servant to a higher power. She was power, liquid and terrible and maternal, a goddess of becoming, cradling all that would ever be in her salt, dark depths. From her, 2 children emerged, On the sky, and Kai the earth, not born like mortals are born, but risen, like bubbles rising through the dark water. They pulled themselves out of her body like islands surfacing from a drowned world. And they clung so tightly to each other in the dark, sky and earth wrapped in a lover's embrace, inseparable, pressing together so tightly that nothing could move between them. It was stillness, a pause between heartbeats, a waiting. Until, of course, then was Enlil, but that is for another verse. For now we sit beside the goddess of the sea. She is not gone. She is simply beneath all things. When the rain falls, when the tide swells, when something ancient stirs in the base of your spine, that is Nammu, remembering. Separation of sky and earth. Sky loved earth. That was the problem. They clung to each other like lovers, like shadows, like breath to the body. There was no space between them, no room for light, no sky for birds, no ground for roots to grow, only closeness, stillness, a world wrapped too tightly to live. They say that On, the sky god, and Kai, the earth goddess, lay locked together, pressed chest to chest, a perfect unity. And yet in their union nothing else could be born. And so their son Enlil, god of wind and air, and everything in between, decided to tear them apart. He didn't ask. He didn't plead. He didn't wait. He rose like a storm, and he forced the sky and the earth apart, prying his father upward to form the vault of heavens, pressing his mother downward to become the land beneath our feet. With that act, he created the world as we know it. Air between earth and sky, space to breathe, light to see, the distance required for life to unfold. That is how the Sumerians said the world was made. Not with a word, not with a let there be, but with force, with wind, with will. Creation here is not obedience. It is conflict. It is separation. It is pain. Now, if you grew up with Genesis, this part might feel familiar. There too the world is born of division. Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Heaven above, earth below, a sky carved like a dome to hold back the deep. But in Genesis, this act of separation is commanded. It is spoken gently, cosmically ordained. In Sumer, it is torn into being. The gods don't speak reality. They wrestle it. They bend it. They break it. And in that violence, life has room to grow. So much myth, so much truth perhaps, depends on who pulls whom apart. In Genesis, The first act of separation is divine and orderly. In Sumer, it is familial. It is wind breaking open the bond between mother and father so something new can take its place. And Lil is not portrayed as cruel, but he is not gentle. He is necessary because creation in this story is not about perfection. It is about making space for imperfection. And in that space, the one Enlil created with his storm hands and wild breath, cities will rise, rivers will run, stories will be written, and demons will crawl in from the edge of the sky. But that comes later. For now, the world has air. For now, there is room for us, the creation of humans. Let us now speak of us, of humans, of how we came to be. Because in the world the Sumerians told stories about, we were not the point. We were the solution, a last resort, a fix for a problem the gods did not want to solve themselves. In the beginning, it was the gods who did the work. They dug the irrigation canals with celestial hands. They stacked bricks in temple walls and planted grain in the cracked soil. They carried offerings up the ziggurat steps, not as recipients, but as servants to the order they themselves had made. And after a time, eternal perhaps, they grew tired. Exhaustion is a divine thing, too. They gathered the gods and they said something like, "This is beneath us. Let us make something that will bear the weight of the world for us." And from this divine complaint, humanity was born. Not from love, not from desire, not from loneliness, but from necessity. They took clay, the same earth that had received the blood of slain gods in older wars, the same mud that lined the rivers of Sumer, and they mixed it with divine blood. A god was chosen, or perhaps tricked, or perhaps sacrificed. The texts differ, but the result is always the same. God blood spilled into dirt, and from it we rose. Not as kings, not as children, not as partners, but as workers. The first humans were created to lift the burden from divine shoulders. We were instruments, built to dig, to harvest, to give offerings, so the gods could rest. You will not find Eden here. No garden was planted for our delight. No beasts were named. No fruit forbidden. There was only the field, the plow, the temple, and us between them. It is tempting, of course, to ask what this means. If Genesis tells us we are made from the dust and the breath of God, Sumer tells us that we are made of mud and murder. Earth, yes, but earth infused with something powerful, ancient and bloody. So the question becomes, are we divine? Or are we just useful? We carry the blood of gods in our veins, but we were not made to walk with them. We were made to work for them. It's an uncomfortable myth, and yet maybe, it is no less holy than the others. Because what does it say about us that even born in servitude, we created music? We painted myths onto temple walls. We carved words into clay that outlived kings. We turned our sweat into cities, our prayers into poetry, our stories into gods. And if we were made to carry the weight of the world, perhaps we also learned to carry each other, to dream, to question, to reach beyond our purpose. Maybe it's not how we were made that matters. Maybe it's what we made after. A garden of another kind. There is a tree. Of course there is. There is always a tree if you go far enough back. before the apple, before the serpent, before the shame that clings to fig leaves, there was another garden, and in it a tree with no name in Hebrew, but roots that reach deeper than Eden. This is the Huluppu Tree. They say it grows on the banks of the Euphrates, planted not by a god, but found by Inanna, Queen of Heaven, Goddess of love, war, and sovereignty. It had been uprooted by a storm, drifted in the flood, a wreck of tangled limbs and soaked roots. And Inanna, young, radiant, clever, saw it and thought, this could become something sacred. So she pulled it from the mud, carried it to her garden in Uruk, and planted it with her own hands. She watched it grow. She waited. In time, she imagined it would become a throne, or perhaps a bed, fit for a queen and her lovers, or her dreams, or both. But the gods, you'll remember, are never the only ones watching. The tree grew wild and strange, too long in the floodwaters, perhaps, too many secrets soaked into its bark, and other things moved in. At its roots, a serpent coiled, not evil, not speaking, simply present, ancient, wise-eyed, and uninvited. In its branches, the Anzu bird made a nest, a lion-headed storm creature, part eagle, part omen, shrieking its forgotten name. And in its trunk, something unnamed made her home. A spirit, a woman, a shadow. Some say it was Lilith. Some call her a Lilith, a daughter of the wind. Others say nothing at all, only that she was there, watching, waiting, refusing to leave. Inanna returned to her garden, ready to harvest the tree, ready to shape it into symbols of power, and found it occupied. She tried to drive the serpent away, tried to shoo the storm bird from its perch, tried to cast the shadow from the trunk. But they would not go. And so Inanna, goddess though she was, wept. Not for her throne, not for her bed, but perhaps for the knowledge that even goddesses cannot always control what they plant. Eventually, it was Gilgamesh, hero, demigod, beloved of the city, who came with axe and shield and cut the tree down. The serpent fled, the bird flew off, and the spirit, the Lilith, slipped away into the world, never seen again, or perhaps always seen, just not by name. Now pause with me. Tilt your head. Look at this story sideways, the way you would a reflection in water. We have a garden. We have a divine woman. We have a tree. We have a serpent. We have a shadowy presence in the center of it all, a feminine figure cast out when the structure no longer had room for her. You recognize the shapes, don't you? Only here, there is no fall, no shame, no punishment. The garden is not a paradise. It is a place of power. And when things go wrong, they do not exile the goddess. She calls for help. She chooses to act. She mourns, yes, but she remains sovereign. So what if Eden was not the first garden? What if it was a remix, a revision, a story rewritten through a lens of obedience and consequence? What if Lilith did not fall because she was sinful, but because she refused to leave the tree, because she refused to obey, refused to make herself small in someone else's vision of order? And what if the serpent never tempted the woman, but once, long ago, the serpent and the woman and the tree were all part of the same myth, the same sacred ecosystem, before someone turned it into a warning? The Huluppu Tree is not paradise, it is potential, and potential always draws in wildness. Serpents, birds, spirits, stories. It is not a place of exile. It is a place where power gathers, where goddesses cry when their visions are interrupted, when spirits flee into the dark rather than submit. It is older than Eden, and it remembers. Legacy and reflection. Let's return now, not to the garden, but to the question. What changes when the first divine being isn't a father figure in the sky, but a mother made of sea and salt? What changes when creation begins not with a word, but with a flood, a goddess, a wound in the shape of a god? What if the world didn't begin as a paradise lost, but as a storm survived? These stories, the Sumerian ones, don't offer us perfection. They offer pattern, cycle, cosmic memory. Creation didn't fall from grace. It fights for space. It separates to grow. It bleeds to make room for something new. There is no original sin here, only original necessity. Humans are not cursed, but commissioned to carry, to build, to dream. The gods are not all-knowing, but restless, imperfect, just like us. And yet, they created a world full of wonder, strangeness, and sacred danger. So perhaps the point was never to be innocent. Perhaps the point was to be conscious, to step into the space between heaven and earth and say, I am here, made of clay and blood. I will write. I will remember. I will speak the stories that the gods do not tell each other anymore. And the stories do remember us, even now, in the wind, in the water, in the long silence between questions. Tease for next episode. Next, we descend deeper. We meet the Queen of Heaven herself, Inanna, goddess of love, war, and of transformation. She is no bride of Adam, no rib taken from a sleeping man. She is thunder in a silk veil, blood on her lip, and a crown made of both roses and swords. She will love you. She will burn you. She will climb down into death and demand it make room for her. And she is coming. If you found value here, please share, like, comment, and subscribe. I am Luciana Hartwin, and this is the Lilith Verse.